So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're all staying very, very safe and healthy. Hope you all know that also the HIA-LI is here fighting the fight with you and for you on a daily basis, sending out critical business resource updates and doing webinars like this. We are really excited to have Congressman Lee Zeldin with us this morning because he also is fighting this fight along with us on a daily basis. And our moderator, Joe Campolo, who is the managing partner of Campolo, Middleton and McCormack, and also our board chair. Before I turned it over to them, I just wanted to thank all our members. We have seen an abundance of kindness and many of you repurposing your manufacturing plants for personal protection equipment and really making connections to both the county and particularly the Suffolk County COVID task force and the state. So thank you for all you're doing through this. We will get through it together. We will get through it stronger, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Campolo.
Great, thanks, Terry. And Terry, thank you so much for leading this fight. You know, you learn about people in the difficult times a lot more than you learn about them in the good times, and that goes as well for our friend Lee Zeldin. I'll tell you to the membership, as soon as this pandemic hit, Lee was the first and only elected official to reach out to me as chair of the HIA-LI and say, what do you guys need and how can I help? And in good times, you know, those messages seem easy. In bad times, those are the messages that mean the most. And Lee not only asked how he could help HIA-LI, he started working right away with Terry and I and Stony Brook Hospital to find companies in the park that could start helping with the PPE shortage that we have. And I just want to say, Lee, that means the world to us here at HIA-LI, and it won't be forgotten. You know, you have been politics is a result-oriented business. And you've been delivering here for the folks on Long Island, and so on behalf of all of us, we want to say thank you for all of that. You know, I want to start obviously hearing your comments and starting on a macro level. I know you're on the Joint Bipartisan Task Force, and I'd love to hear from a macro level sort of what you're seeing, what you're doing, and how Washington's responding, and then we can get into the weeds on a couple of issues that I know our members are very interested in hearing you on. So welcome.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for your leadership with HIA, to Terry, for everybody for joining this call this morning. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. And I hope that we are now on the other side of this peak. And as we see each day, the reports, the governor does his press conference, and we see hospitalizations going down and the total number of deaths, while every single death is as tragic, the number is still too high. It's nice to see that number is on the decrease. And hopefully over the course of these next few weeks, we can see our economy start reopening again and rebounding again. And on the macro level, as far as the conversation right now all across our country, to answer Joe's question, that's really what the talk is largely about. It's how our country can reopen. And for us to be able to do it smartly and precisely, we want to do it in a way that prevents another outbreak, understanding that not every state is the same and not every region of every state is the same. I had a conversation with a colleague about a week and a half ago where he was asking about Long Island, and I was telling him about our numbers, which now are over 65,000 positive cases between Suffolk and Nassau. In his entire congressional district that spans many, many, many counties, he had less than 50 positive coronavirus cases. Everyone, regardless of whether you're in a district like that or if you're on Long Island, everyone is anxious to be able to reopen our economy. We all understand that there's no act of Congress that's going to do more to energize our economy than reopening our economy will do. Congress has passed a few pieces of legislation to help drive money towards small businesses and workers, towards hospitals, towards testing, towards state and local governments. And there's a negotiation going on for another bill. And it is important for us to have that dialogue. If anyone has any great ideas for ways to help our country get through this, we should certainly entertain any of those ideas, regardless of where they come from. At the same time, my message to all of my colleagues is that if their idea is unrelated to coronavirus response, that they should save it for a different bill on another debate on another day. But if you have a great idea, if you're a member of Congress, or you're not, but you have a great idea for Congress, and if it's going to help our country get through this, then we should certainly listen to it and entertain it. I serve on the President's Task Force for Reopening the Economy. Through that work last Tuesday, a week ago today, I met with the President in the Oval Office for about an hour and a half. I met with his Chief of Staff for lunch before that, as well as some meetings afterwards. So I spent several hours at the White House, and it was great to be able to bring local stories to the discussion. I specifically, in my meeting with the Chief of Staff, raised HIA as an example with regards to applications for small business assistance. I did the same thing last Friday. The Long Island Congressional Delegation hosted a press conference on Zoom. It was the first time that we did that. That was all 5 of us, because Greg Meeks has parts of Nassau. And during that press conference, I also raised the HIA example for small business assistance. Also, both during the White House meeting as well as that press conference, I raised the Brookhaven example, because the CARES Act drive money to state and local governments. Suffolk County, for example, received $257 million. Brookhaven has an estimated $12 million loss as a result directly of coronavirus. And because of the pandemic and that loss, I'm advocating for additional support to help a town like Brookhaven, for example, because their population wasn't 500,000. That's what the population needed to be in order to qualify for CARES Act support. And Brookhaven's population is just under 500,000. So driving more support to state and local governments is important. Having more flexibility to smartly spend that money is important. And also in providing additional funding, we should drive direct aid to entities under 500,000. One last piece I'll mention, and it's part of a macro conversation, but with a local connection, is that late yesterday afternoon, the Federal Reserve decided to expand access to their municipal liquidity facility. This is important for a county like Suffolk. Originally, the municipal liquidity facility was only going to qualify a county with a population of 2 million or more. Now, Suffolk County is a county that is larger than many states, yet it wasn't large enough to qualify for the municipal liquidity facility. I had a phone call that I set up last Thursday with County Executive Steve Bellone and Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin, where the 3 of us discussed expanding access. This followed a letter that I sent to Secretary Mnuchin and Federal Reserve Board Chairman Jerome Powell, Jay Powell. And the call went really well last Thursday night. And late yesterday afternoon, they expanded municipal liquidity facility to include Suffolk, which is a direct benefit to Suffolk County taxpayers. Everyone needs to continue to work together as an all-of-government approach, in government and out, which brings me back to Joe's opening comment, that the first thought when this all broke and I heard about shortages of PPE in our local hospitals is that there are amazing entrepreneurs on this call. There are amazing entrepreneurs inside of HIA. Some of these business wouldn't be able to function otherwise, so there might be in a position to transition over. And whether we have seen it with ChemBio and antibody development in their partnership with Stony Brook, or some of the face shields that have been manufactured at HIA. In so many ways, all of you have stepped up to help our local community. And it's great for me to be on this call to answer your questions. And thanks again to Joe and Terry for the invitation.
Thanks, Lee. And probably the biggest questions we got when people were registering were about the PPP, the payroll protection plan. And you know, government run things are difficult. This seemed to roll out very quickly, and I was listening to Secretary Mnuchin this morning on CNBC talk about sort of how the Treasury is trying to help make sure the funding goes to small businesses that truly need it rather than larger businesses that don't. But the biggest question, Lee, that's coming up here on Long Island, because, you know, the governor has tagged Nassau and Suffolk County to New York City in terms of reopening, which means there's going to be a lag as to when non-essential businesses here on Long Island can be reopened. And the way the PPP works is you have 8 weeks to dispense of the funds, you know, once the funds are distributed into your bank account, once they're deposited in the bank account. And the challenge that the members are feeling right now is, even if we get funded, those who are getting funded in round 2 get funded today, there's still going to be a 4-week lag before we even start opening up non-essential businesses at best here on Long Island. And so how, from a macro plan, can we try and get relief on a micro plan that makes sense for Long Island? I mean, many of the businesses here, Lee, and you know this because your district is very broad, many of the businesses here are multi-generational businesses. And as a business owner watching a business right now, it's like somebody being on ICU. There's a lot of pain, and I know you get that. And so from a micro level here on Long Island, is there a way to try and change those regs so we can have some more breathing room as businesses here versus other states that didn't have anywhere near the amount of shutdown that we did?
First off, with regards to PPP and EIDL, the emergency injury disaster loans, those are the loans for up to $2 million. PPP are loans for up to $10 million with a generous loan forgiveness. If anyone out there has gotten their application approved and funded, that's great news. If anyone has submitted an application, they believe that they qualify and they haven't gotten approval yet, the funding, as everyone knows, was replenished through a bill that passed the Senate last Tuesday, the House last Thursday, and signed by the President on Friday. Yesterday morning, the funds started to go out again. For anyone who hasn't yet gotten their application approved for this first tranche or second tranche yet, if you'd like, I wanted to give out my phone number at the office, 631-289-1097. My email address is congressmanzeldin1@mail.house.gov. We have members of our team who are assisting local small businesses in navigating this process to get funded. Because to really the heart of Joe's question is the 8 weeks of a generous loan forgiveness program is fantastic, but maybe some additional flexibility is needed in an area where the economy doesn't reopen as quickly. Priority number one for me right now is ensuring that as many of our local small businesses are getting the support from the first 8 weeks, because some people haven't even gotten their first week covered yet of a PPP application. As far as negotiations of a phase 4 bill, part of that talk should factor in the reality that some states are having their businesses reopening right now. Some were much more liberal in their policies over the course of these last several weeks. Ironically, as I say that they were liberal in their policies, they happen to be some of the most conservative states ideologically. So you have some fun trying to figure that one out. But as far as liberal policies of allowing more businesses to be open, some states didn't even execute the full stay-at-home order. They had different ways, unique ways of implementing a vision that the governor had, and each state has been impacted a little bit differently, but that different vision has resulted in some states over the course of the last several days starting to reopen their economies. As far as the vision of our governor, he has options. One of the options is some type of a reopening that might have businesses opening up upstate New York before downstate New York. Part of the vision seems to have certain industries opening before other industries in downstate New York, and there seems to be this lag time. And I believe, especially as the numbers are going down and the weather is warming and businesses are desperate to get open in order to survive, this is about life and death. there will be increased pressure on the governor to find new ways to move that timeline up as much as possible. So you really have two convergent forces here, Joe, directly to answer your question. And first off, going into analyzing those two, one is just getting as many people approved for their application as possible. But two is as you go through the negotiation on a phase 4 bill, if there are ways to institute flexibility to provide additional support for businesses in the area that's hardest hit, I strongly support that. And the second component of that analysis is the decision and timeline of the governor of reopening our economy here on Long Island as quickly as possible and as smartly as possible, because we don't want another outbreak to take place. And one last alibi is that just a few days ago, the Department of Treasury put out new guidance with a message to businesses that if you're a business that doesn't need to apply, then this money is not for you. And I think it's important for the Department of Treasury to put out that guidance just before the weekend, because this isn't a moment for businesses that are flush with cash and individuals that are comfortably wealthy to be asking what the government can do for you. It's a moment, as far as life and death, it's about survival, not fortune. If you're in a position where you're doing well right now, you look around to your community and see how you can help others. So hopefully that change in policy, that guidance put out by the Treasury, will result in more businesses being able to successfully apply that truly need it in order to survive.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Again, the Secretary of the Treasury this morning gave out some great stats insofar as this second round of funding. The loan amounts went way down, right? So more small businesses who actually need it are those that are applying for and getting it right now. And Lee, like you know, as a business lawyer, my days are spent just talking to business owners, trying to help them find ways to survive right now. And really, just the same way I think you were able to advocate for Brookhaven and Suffolk County to the Treasury, we need some strong leadership advocating for this region to get some extended periods of time with PPP forgiveness to whatever extent possible. The other issue I wanted to bring up with you, because I know that, again, just so everybody understands, HIA-LI is a 501c6. Okay, it's a business organization. It's not considered a not-for-profit charitable organization, even though it's a not-for-profit. And under the EIDL, 501c6s are not permitted to receive loans, the disaster recovery loans, which is something we found out and we brought to your attention right away. And your office has been incredibly responsive and great in terms of that. But one of the things we need to make sure is getting back to that bipartisan task force, Lee, which you understand so well, is how important organizations like HIA-LI and other business organizations are going to be to a region's economic recovery, right? And that they're going to need help to sustain as businesses continue to try and get on their feet. Things like memberships in organizations are just not going to be the top priority to pay, and we need advocacy that these business organizations have to lead the way, have to give people confidence to be able to take risks moving forward. So can you just talk about that a little bit to our members, please?
Yeah, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I had brought this up last Tuesday at the White House. I raised it last Friday on the Long Island Congressional Delegation phone call. The application of HIA specifically, while you have many members inside of your ranks qualified and able to receive the funding from your application, HIA's status has been one where we can't honestly get a straight answer to whether or not HIA qualifies. And the fact that we can't get that straight answer from the Small Business Administration has been concerning, to say the very least. And obviously, it's not can't be viewed as any more concerning than if you're Terry or if it's you, Joe, and other members of the team focused on HIA survival. I used the two examples. One was HIA and talking about what HIA does to support the businesses that are members, to be able to promote the region, to promote opportunities, to network. I also used the Discover Long Island example as well, because as you're reopening and you're going into the summer season, many of the businesses all across Long Island rely on the tourism and hospitality industry. It's about branding Long Island. It's about promoting businesses island-wide. So these are two examples of entities I believe are natural partners. While you all may or may not be in direct discussions, both have reached out to me. And in my opinion, both entities should qualify for all of the right reasons. And these are entities that help to ensure that when our economy is reopening, that our economy starts roaring again as quickly as possible. So we have pressed for that straight answer, and ultimately it might require inclusion in a phase 4 coronavirus bill to make it black and white clear. If the SBA can't give a straight answer because they just don't know what the right answer is, I mean, listen, they're not saying no. They're just not answering as far as entities like HIA and Discovery Long Island. And the fact that they're not giving a straight answer on it leads me to believe that they need clear guidance that it's okay. It should be congressional intent and congressional action to ensure that these two organizations and many like them can apply for these loans.
That's great. And Discover Long Island is a great partner of HIA-LI. In fact, Terry just recently joined their board, and we work very closely with them. So the fact that you see that and are presenting that is really, truly appreciated. The state. So obviously the state has been hit hard, right? And it kind of puts you in a tough spot as a Long Island Republican congressman, and now we have this tussle going on in the Senate between what phase 4 is going to look like for funding to states that have been hit hard. What's your take on it? What's the perspective you have? What's the discussions that are happening in your bipartisan committee on this issue?
Well, I'd highlight two main points. One is that additional funding is needed in a phase 4 bill for state and local governments. The funding, as I pointed out early, should include direct aid towards local governments with populations under 500,000, because the CARES Act set the population threshold at 500,000. So additional aid to state and local governments, including smaller governments. That's one. Two is that the formula in the CARES Act requires the money given to Suffolk County, for example, to be for coronavirus-related expenses. $257 million towards coronavirus-related expenses is a lot of money. And as far as the formula goes, Suffolk County taxpayers specifically will benefit more if there was additional flexibility for coronavirus-related impacts. Suffolk County is going to take a massive hit, for example, on sales tax revenue. So there are two sides of the ledger here, and to help Suffolk County taxpayers, as well as our local towns and for our state taxpayers, is to not just provide additional aid, but for having some additional smart flexibility in how that formula is crafted. So those are the two components of the phase 4 bill. Bankruptcy is not the answer. I don't agree with that sentiment, that view. I would also add that there should be an understanding in these conversations with each other that yes, there were state and local governments that were cash strapped going into this. But if New York State, for example, is $6 billion in a hole with a deficit going into the coronavirus pandemic, and they come out at say $15 billion in the hole, I don't know the exact number, then we should at least be able to acknowledge that that math would mean that there's $9 billion more of coronavirus related impacts to the state of New York. So even if you decide it's your position as a member of Congress that New York State shouldn't get help for that additional $6 billion, you take that position, I would strongly argue and encourage you to have an open mind with regards to the other $9 billion that really is a direct result of coronavirus related impact. That would be my plea. And I would add this: it's the spirit of New Yorkers that if any other state in the country would see an impact like New York has seen in a moment, in a New York minute, we would quickly be doing everything in our power to assist that other state. So for any of my colleagues from any other state in the union, understanding that New York has not only been hit harder than any other state in the country, but that New York State's been hit harder than any country in the entire world. No country in the world's been hit harder than our state's been hit. That my colleagues from these other states should understand what we would be willing to do for them in this moment, and also understand that regardless of your opinion of the deficit that we had going into this, that it's many billions more as a result of it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I totally agree with you. New Yorkers would step up in a heartbeat. I totally agree with that. Senator, I want to remind the members that you can text, use the chat function to text a question specifically. Lee, let's talk about PPE, right? So one of the questions is, why were we so unprepared for something like this in terms of our state readiness and our federal depository readiness? And do you feel we're making progress and are more prepared, or prepared for threats in the future, or prepared if this thing surges in the fall? I mean, big nervous concern on everybody's mind, especially business owners, goes quiet for the summer and then we have a surge in the fall. And I have to tell you that I think, irrespective of politics, I think the federal government has done a tremendous job. Initially, PPE was needed and they delivered. Then ventilators were needed and they delivered. And now testing is needed. So where do you see that going, and how comfortable are you that we're moving in the right direction?
We need to get to a place where we're never relying on another country again for an emergency response to a pandemic. We need to have an emergency preparedness plan. This is something that I forwarded to the president directly yesterday, late on Sunday, in detail, with regards to the idea that I've been talking about here for a few weeks now, where between our national stockpile, our state stockpiles, and a domestic emergency manufacturing plan, that between ventilators, PPE, and to the maximum extent possible medicines as well, that we should never have to rely on another country going forward. We are more prepared now than we've been in the past. There is more to do. We certainly are seeing a ramped up capacity right now of ventilators, where over the course of the summer and into the fall, I'm sure that we'll be seeing not just the national stockpile, but state stockpiles stronger than they've been on ventilator capacity. I'm sure that over the course of the summer and fall, that you'll see national and state stockpiles increasing the amount of PPE that is available. And that same thing goes as it relates to medicines that are needed. As advancements are being made regarding testing, treatment, vaccinations, there will be new ways of treatment, for example, that we might not know about now. That might be further along too on the FDA process as we're getting into the fall and winter of next year. But if you identify a new way to treat coronavirus in the months ahead, let's make sure that we have it on hand, so that fast forward to a season next year, where if it was to come back, that we're not stuck in the same place relying on a foreign country in order to get that here. Going forward, we need to ensure that between those three items that I mentioned, that we within our own borders are capable of responding as it relates to PPE, ventilators, and to the maximum extent possible medicines too. Maybe one of the ways that we get there should be that an area like Hapag, maybe amongst the membership on this call, that there are hubs around our country that are used as part of that domestic emergency manufacturing plan, where you have businesses that have a different business model for a different product, but have a plan within the business and have access to the materials. Supply chain is important. If you want to make an isolation gown, but you have to get the materials from Malaysia, you aren't any further along tomorrow than you were today if you don't have the materials to make the product. But where you have businesses that are signed up for this domestic emergency manufacturing plan, so that you essentially can turn a key and all of a sudden these businesses are able to switch over lines from one to the other to be able to produce for our country. So that's the idea in great detail that I provided to the president on Sunday, that I've been discussing for a while, that I have colleagues in Congress have been discussing for a while, that really should be implemented so that we're better prepared, best prepared in a way that is far better than any past pandemic our country has ever had to confront.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So politics aside, Lee, right? What is your view on how we got here? Was it China? Was it the WHO? I mean, what are just the facts as to how we sort of got here from your perspective?
Key number one is early detection. If you want to prevent an epidemic, if you want to prevent a pandemic, you detect it early. There needs to be transparency. It was substantially lacking as we're going through the months of December and January. And whether it was China or the World Health Organization, we lost out on the most fundamental, basic, important aspect of preventing an epidemic and a pandemic, and that's early detection. And when you're able to have that early detection combined with transparency as far as what exactly is taking place, then you're able to initiate certain mitigation measures instantly so that you're able to contain and eradicate. But what happens if you lose out on early detection and you're not able to institute the appropriate mitigation efforts early, is that it becomes much more difficult in order to contain and eradicate. To a certain extent, it could be too late already. I think one of the other challenges that we faced here, and we're still facing today, is domestic politics. And that there's just been for many in government and out of government, for many in the media, there's been a desire for all of us to work together with one spirit, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans, as New Yorkers, as Long Islanders. We're all on the same team here. And that attitude has been prevalent. However, it's not universal. And for some, whether it's some of my colleagues in Congress who have atrophy in their bipartisan muscles, they just don't know how to use bipartisan muscles, and they're more interested in November election. They're more interested in power and prestige and perks over that spirit of really not only bipartisanship, but nonpartisanship. Or if it's members of the media putting out information that's just not accurate. While I said that some members of the media have been doing a fantastic job through this, you're seeing it right now over the course of the last 24 hours. There are people who are saying that it was put into the president's daily briefing several times over the course of December and January, certain warnings as related to coronavirus. And the federal government, the people who actually give the briefing, the people in the room, are telling, would tell that reporter that that's just not an accurate story, that's not true, and then you run with the story anyway. That aspect of journalism has been unfortunate through this. I think we all need to root for our country's success, root for each other's success in and out of government, in business, whether you're the owner or you're the employee, whether you're the healthcare worker, the trucker, the farmer, the grocery store worker. We all should be in this together, rooting for each other. And I think that's been another dynamic of it that's been unfortunate. But none of those other elements, and honestly, I could Monday morning quarterback 1,000 different components, and of doing everything as best as possible in hindsight. I can give you a long answer that would easily take up the whole hour. But first and foremost, fundamentally, one would be the need for early and transparent detection so that you can institute mitigation efforts to contain and eradicate. And two would be the answer to your last question, and that ensuring that we don't have to rely like this on foreign countries for personal protective equipment and medicines. And then three, which was the second point to my answer here, is that we just need to all view this as in it together as fellow Americans, rooting for each other, helping each other, getting through it together.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I can tell you that from the business community's perspective, nobody gives a damn about party affiliation right now. We just need help. We just need things getting done, right? And that's, I think, the people that will be rewarded. Just getting back to PPP for a minute, because I know that anxiety is on everybody's minds now. And we talked about, and I appreciate, because I agree with you. Step one is let's get as many people the loan as possible. Step two is let's try and get Treasury to have a regional approach to how it's going to forgive. But there is a step three there, Lee, that has to be looked at, and that is this notion that the commercial lenders, particularly the big banks, really dropped the ball and sort of cherry-picked, the bigger clients that they were going to put through the portal first, the support for the smaller clients where there wasn't a relationship there, fell through the cracks and continue to fall through the cracks. And I greatly appreciate you giving your contact information for them to reach out. We have been working with alternative lenders furiously to try and get those people there. But where does that leave us with the banks? Because now the business community just doesn't trust these big banks at all. And from Congress's perspective, is that something that needs to be looked at, once this is behind us?
Yeah, that's already started. I can tell you as a member of the House Financial Services Committee, that's also a source of bipartisan interest, concern, oversight. We have been having phone calls with not just the leadership of various large banks in our country and smaller banks as well, to be candid, and also with some of the agencies that conduct oversight, that put out regulations and guidance. Some of the, I guess it's important to first off say thank you to many of the lenders that did a fantastic job with that first tranche. There were lenders with high success rates starting the first moment that PPP became available that first Friday morning. And there were a lot of smaller banks. There were a lot of community banks all across our entire country that did a fabulous job. But as you pointed out, you had a few big banks capable of hitting the ground running, but choosing to prioritize the larger loan over the smaller loan so that they could do just about the same amount of work, but make more money as a consequence. And that's an issue. There's a lawsuit that has already been filed against a bunch of the larger banks. Another issue is that you had banks that were motivated to do the right thing and to hit the ground running, but whether it's IT issues, compliance issues, just not knowing how to do it, maybe they were an SBA preferred lender going in, you had some banks that meant well and they fell straight on their face. And I think that as we are approaching scrutiny of the banks that had problems with the first tranche, I think that we should be viewing it really in three different categories. Category one is the bank capable that deliberately made the decision to prioritize the larger loan over the smaller loan. They've ended up with lawsuits. They're being shamed. They're going to be target of oversight. They're going to take some heat, and hopefully they do the second tranche correct. The second category is the bank that wasn't trying to prioritize the big guy over the little guy. They just fell on their face for everyone. Whether you're applying for a large loan or a small loan, there are some banks that just did a really bad job. And you had a number of Long Island small businesses, large and small, that applied for these loans. And when I say large, I'm talking about on the larger end of the 500 employees or less. Some of the larger businesses and small where everybody was unable to get the first tranche. The third category would be a bank in one of those first two categories that does a really good job with the second tranche. here's an opportunity after just over a week of PPP and EIDL not having any funding for these banks to work out any kinks, to have any type of reflection, have meetings inside of their boardroom or via Zoom or however else they're communicating, and figure out what they need to do this second tranche right. So if you're a bank in one of those first two categories, and you're going to nail this second tranche well, and you're not going to pick winners and losers of the larger businesses over the smaller businesses, if you had a lot of glitches and you've worked out the glitch, then I think that coming out of this second tranche of money, that people are not going to, and I don't think should, lump you in with the banks of the first two categories. If you're still falling on your face here through the second tranche, then you deserve an enormous amount of scrutiny and shame coming out of this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this was, certainly in my career, this was the biggest financial challenge we faced, right? And it was the biggest opportunity for banks on a macro level to step up, and some didn't, some didn't. And again, it's a result-driven economy, and I think the market will shake out. But those large banks, they're not going to be impacted by small businesses leaving them. They're going to have Congress take a look at them and figure out why the hell they did it the way they did it. And I guess that'll be post-haste. Some of the questions we're getting, Lee, so just going back to, Secretary Mnuchin this morning saying that he's going to be issuing a directive that any loan that was in excess of $2 million is going to automatically be audited to make sure that the funds were necessary and used properly. And this certification that the Treasury talks about and requires to take PPP loans, it's confusing, right? There's confusion there. I mean, there's no way in the middle of a pandemic, there's no way to know, how your business is going to be impacted. Everybody's laid people off and furloughed people. I mean, what's the line in your mind? What's the line in your mind that businesses should be looking at when they're accepting these loans? Where was Congress's intent in passing this law as to what businesses should be able to accept these loans?
Well, the first test would be the smell test. I mean, I remember I was in Iraq. I had a battalion commander who wanted to use white phosphorus on a mission. And he was asking me whether he could. And while I was recommending he didn't, and I was strongly recommending that he didn't, he decided that he wanted to use it anyway. And I decided that one last attempt to try to get him to convince his mind, to change his mind, was that I put a CNN story in front of him of a Marine officer who chose to use white phosphorus, and because of collateral damage, he ended up on the receiving end of the CNN story. So I printed out the story, I put it in front of the battalion commander, and I said, sir, as I said, you can use it. I strongly recommend that you don't. You just have to be comfortable with the possibility that there may be another story like this targeting you. And he read this story and he instantly decided not to use white phosphorus on the mission. I think that a very basic smell test here is very helpful for businesses to use in applying. And you have the Ruth Chris example and you have the Shake Shack example. And while it's education funding and not PPP funding, you have the Harvard example, where in the Harvard example, they have a $40 billion endowment and they would be receiving $9 million of CARES Act funding. That's not congressional intent. If you have a $40 billion endowment, you don't need $9 million right now in order to survive this pandemic. The Ruth Chris and the Shake Shack example, they ultimately decided to give back the money. So I would say if it's a business out there, within HIA, I don't know if you have any businesses that wouldn't pass the smell test if they apply. So I really don't have a single one that comes to mind. Maybe you do because maybe one pops into your head. But I would say the best thing is for that applicant to do their own reflection, and if they think that they might become the next Shake Shack or the next Ruth Chris because they're doing very well, they're high profile, and they don't need the money, then just don't apply. And I think that that's the most basic way to analyze congressional intent. To go a little bit further, you're bringing it up some of the specifics of Secretary Mnuchin this morning. I raised a little earlier on this call the guidance put out by the Department of Treasury that in good faith, you're going to have to attest to your need for the funds to survive. And I think that that guidance, which if you look at the FAQs of Treasury, which get updated a lot, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it might be question 31. At least it was 31 as of over the weekend when I was looking through the FAQs. But what happened was the CARES Act was passed, the PPP was stood up, and you're trying to get that money out the door as quickly as possible. So by the next Friday, you had it opening up where applications started to be received, and folks were just jumping all over it to get their applications in as quickly as possible, and banks were trying to get stood up as quickly as possible. But I can't think of an example of an HIA business where they shouldn't put the application in. My guidance actually would be to apply. And if for some reason you decide that you don't need it, then you can decide later, but at least get the application in, because last thing you want to do is be so late to the party that there isn't money to apply for. And again, I can't think of any HIA example that is like the Ruth Chris or Shake Shack or Harvard examples.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the value to this program, Lee, is being able to make sure our people are taken care of and their families are taken care of, right? It's a terribly terrible feeling as a business owner. You're not just worried about your own family, you're worried about all your employees' families. And I think everybody that I've spoken to in terms of clients and HIA members, that's their intent. They just want to make sure that their people's families have some money coming in to be able to pay their bills. Another group of questions we received is insurance companies now en masse disavowing business interruption insurance. Is that something that's being kicked around Washington? Have you heard that being looked into in your circles, and what's your take on that?
Yeah, right now we have TRIA, Terrorism Risk Insurance, and you have this federal backstop. The program has worked well. Fast forward to today, there's now a discussion of creating something called PRIA. So there you have pandemic risk insurance, where you'd have a federal backstop as it relates to pandemics hitting. What you can't do is just have government tell all insurance companies that they all have to pay anyone's claims on business interruption right now, because it wasn't part of the policies. It wasn't being priced for. It's not in the reserve. So what ends up happening, it might feel good to tell every insurance company, okay, let's all empty out your reserves now to pay everyone's claims for business interruption. And then for everything else that isn't excluded, that people have been paying for, that has been priced inside of insurance policies, there's no money to pay any other claims for anything. Because you just emptied it out through a government mandate to cover business interruption insurance, even though there was an exclusion. So if government wants to issue a mandate like that, government's going to have to help pay for it. When I say government's going to help pay for it, we also have to understand the reality that means it's taxpayers are going to have to pay for it. And if taxpayers don't have the money to pay for it, then it's our kids. My daughters are 13 years old, and many years down the road, they'll be looking at this moment in time and some other moments in time, like after 9/11, the several years that followed and the several $1 trillion that got spent overseas in the Middle East. There are these examples. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. All right. So there are these examples over the course of the last generation where we've added a significant amount of money to the debt. So I'll sum it all up like this. There's a discussion about PRIA. I'm all for having this discussion. I'm not in favor of the federal government providing no support and just putting an unfunded mandate onto the insurance companies, that if you're going to institute the policy, you follow the model of what worked with TRIA, and that you provide that support. Additionally, you have to approach everything as responsibly as possible. I have some colleagues, they've absolutely blown the lid off as it relates to spending. There's no such thing as spending too much money. And that's where it is so important that we are narrowly focused on spending as little money as possible to get through this, to be able to survive. That does mean you do need to spend money on businesses that have been impacted. You do need to spend money on workers. You need to spend money on testing, hospitals, on state and local governments. That money has to get spent. And anyone who out of fiscal conservatism wants to vote no on every bill that's coming out of Congress and not provide any support at all, the impacts would be absolutely devastating. It would literally destroy our country if Congress wouldn't act. On the flip side of it, if anyone's position is that there's no such thing as spending too much money, and their ideas are getting extremely creative, by the way, I've seen many of them as part of the vetting process, that's not the answer either. So if we're going to institute something called PRIA, similar to TRIA, it's going to have the government backstop, it's going to have oversight, and it's going to have to be done responsibly in a way that doesn't break all of the insurance companies' reserves, where there's no money to pay any other claims, and that it doesn't blow the lid off on the cost side to the point where everything add up for every good idea everyone has to throw money at the problem, that we're adding $10 trillion to our nation's debt.
Right. So we just have a few more minutes, but there's two more questions I want to get to. One is a question, the member just raised a question about talk about a food shortage and things that are coming out from Tyson and others about food shortages. What information do you have for the members about that?
So USDA, the Department of Agriculture, they're working very hard at trying to figure out how to get through this. Big red flags right now that are being thrown up as far as food supply goes. Fortunately, as we're going through the first several weeks of this outbreak, the food supply remained abundant. It remained strong and healthy. Right now, I wouldn't say that the food supply is broken. I wouldn't say that it's no longer abundant. I wouldn't say that it's no longer healthy. But there are big red flags that need to be dealt with because you're seeing certain plants shutting down that produce an enormous amount of quantity and quality to our country. So, it is something that is important for the Department of Agriculture, Department for USDA, important for these private businesses, for the states where these are located, to put in all of the measures possible to be able to get these plants back up and running as quickly as possible, because we're on a trend right now where we can be having this conversation 2 weeks from now, and I won't be able to tell you that our food supply is abundant or healthy. I won't be able to tell you that it's not broken. So it's on a concerning trend. However, it's not something where everyone should be flipping out on Long Island, because that's not going to resolve it. But what we do need is for that continued all-in effort by Department of Agriculture, USDA, the states, and these private businesses to institute whatever measures are possible to get these plants back online as quickly as possible, because you can't just continue to have these plants go offline at this pace without bringing some of the plants that closed reopen.
Great. And just two more quick questions. So testing, Lee. Everybody's talking about testing being our key to getting through this and opening up the economy. Where are we at with testing? What's your perspective on that?
We have seen different aspects of testing continue to get developed and ramped up as we've gone through these last couple of months. I received last Tuesday a coronavirus test as part of going into the Oval Office. That's part of the process. This wasn't the first version of a diagnostic test, but I'll tell you that this latest version of a diagnostic test was uncomfortable. And it kind of gave me some perspective as they were explaining to me what the first diagnostic test was, the earlier version. Being able to get more rapid testing, to be able to get that ramped up for people to be tested from home, all of this, you've seen amazing, great, urgent, fast strides in getting the new technology made and identifying ways to manufacture it to the masses. Part of the equipment needed for some of the diagnostic testing, again, going back to one of your earlier questions about supply chain and pandemic response, is that we were trying to get in cotton swabs from Italy. And I'm talking to a local medical provider and they're telling me that they have 5 swabs left. And then they get a resupply just in time to be able to continue the diagnostic testing. But that part has been hairy. As far as getting the testing out to the public, we have, just in the 1st Congressional District, we have 4 of the drive-through sites, so that's been good. I mentioned ChemBio, which is a place in Hauppauge that really HIA should be very proud of, because it's a neighbor, it's part of the community, and they received emergency use authorization on the antibody testing, and they're working with Stony Brook. New York State just finished the phase 2 of their antibody testing. That's yielding results that are very important in doing a reopening in order to measure certain aspects of how the community health-wise is responding to the reopening of the economy. The development, the research as it relates to treatments and vaccines, that all continues. That's hugely important. There are many different treatments going through different phases of studies, of trials, of FDA approval, as well as the vaccine development. And we've heard this 12 to 18-month timeline given. And we really need that timeline for the vaccine development to be on the shorter end of things, so that people can get can receive their vaccines in the 2020-2021 winter season, if at all possible. That's a very ambitious timeline, but that would be much better than having to wait to the far end of that timeline. So in the diagnostic testing, antibody testing, and the treatment research, plasma research, and the vaccine development, there's so much that's going on so quickly. And we are doing, if you look at New York State's numbers, the amount of testing that we're doing of all sorts, I would make the argument that we are not just ahead of the curve in our region or in our country, but New York has been ahead of the curve globally. And we should be really proud as New Yorkers to be leading the way as we have been with the amount of tests that we've been pushing out here in our state.
Great. And last question, Lee, is infrastructure spending. So we've heard a lot about over the past few years getting infrastructure spending. Construction is so critical to Long Island's economy and growth. Where do you see on the list of priorities infrastructure spending coming out of Washington?
December of 2015, we passed the 5-year fully funded highway bill. That was a 5-year bill for those doing the rough math. That was December 2015, which means that Congress needs to pass another highway bill by the end of this year. So if we have to pass another highway bill anyway, and the 5-year bill that was passed December of 2015 was a product of great bipartisanship, Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, and the Obama White House, everybody worked together to get that bill passed. We need to get another highway bill. And if you're trying to come up with funding for another infrastructure bill, that right there is going to get you several $100 billion. I'm sorry, $700 million. Yes, several $100 billion. So the number for the 5-year highway bill when it was originally passed, I think was about 500 and maybe it was somewhere around 565 billion, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been increased, that number, since then. So using that rough formula of how we paid for that bill, let's say you're looking at $600–700 billion. If you're having a discussion of how to get to a $2 billion bill, I think that everyone will have a much easier time in figuring out how to spend it. The tougher conversation is how are you going to pay for it? Now, there's a mixture of ideas that are out there. Part of it is going to be tax dollars spent, just an appropriation being made to go towards the funding. There's been talk of having tax credits, about having public-private partnerships. You have trades unions here on Long Island. I'm sure that the operating engineers, for example, would like to invest their pension funds in projects where they're able to do the work as opposed to sending it to somewhere else in order for someone else, to support someone else's job and someone else's infrastructure project. It's not just about their jobs, but it's also about their local community. Unleashing private capital, looking at the tax credit option, looking at the public-private partnership, working with these pension funds, these all should be part of the conversation to get to the number. Now, what's being discussed is a $2 trillion number. And as far as how exactly this plays out, honestly, Joe, I don't know. But I think we should be having the conversation. We should be having it in good faith. We should be having it with urgency. There is a need to invest in our nation's infrastructure. If there's a deal to be had, we should chase after it, understanding that, listen, even if we don't find an infrastructure deal right now, we have to reach one anyway by the end of the year. And it's going to come up on everyone very quickly. So let's chase after this opportunity right now in a bipartisan spirit, in a way that has helped us get legislation passed over the course of these next several weeks. If there's an infrastructure deal to be had, it's better for us to do it now rather than procrastinating and delaying and getting something done, which might be a half effort later.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we would love to hear about productive move forward spending. It would be really good for the country's health to be focusing on what's next when we open the economy. So Lee, I just want to thank you from the members' perspectives. Really great insights. We appreciate your understanding of the need to get more people to apply for the PPP loans, of the need to have discussions to give us potentially some relief from that 8-week window that's there, and the need to continue to advocate for the 501c6s especially. Those are all great things directly impacting all of our members that you're working on, and we know how hard you're working on that. If you could, in your final comments, just give everybody your contact information that you gave out beforehand, so if they have any follow-up questions, they can reach out to your office. That would be terrific.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you again to Terry, to HIA, for everyone for tuning in. The questions were great. I enjoyed the conversation. If anyone needs any assistance, please call my office at 631-289-1097. My email address, congressmanzeldin1@mail.house.gov. Please reach out if we can assist you in any way. While the disclaimer is always, if you need help on a federal issue, please reach out. I do remember I can't help but smile on the inside thinking about the person who reached out to me when I first came into office trying to get their cat out of the neighbor's tree, and a credit to my one staffer who then made sure that he was able to help get the cat out of the tree. I don't have a paver. I can't fix your pothole, but if you reach out to me and you need help connecting with a highway superintendent or a town councilman, even though our disclaimer is to reach out on federal issues, if you need any help on anything where I can be of assistance, please don't hesitate to call. Again, 631-289-1097 or congressmanzeldin1@mail.house.gov. Thank you again to Terry, to Joe, for all of you, the HIA. Look forward to doing it again.
Great. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for delivering for all of Long Island. We really appreciate how hard you are working for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
How do you feel about that?
That was a good discussion.
It was a good discussion, right?
Yeah.